All right, welcome to your final rapid-fire field briefing. We are going to take all those dense academic notes and transform them into a crystal-clear roadmap for your upcoming anthropology exam. If you've been looking for an explainer that cuts through the noise and gets straight to exactly what you need to know, well, you are in the right place.
So let's kick things off with a pretty massive question. Why do you act the way you do? To truly ace this exam, we've got to look at our cultural subject, meaning an individual human, and understand the invisible forces that are literally dictating who they marry, how they trade, and what they worship. Today, we're going to train you to think exactly like a professional research anthropologist.
Okay, let's dive right in. We're going to be using Conrad Kotek's text as our primary field guide to zoom out from the individual mind to global society. This is basically going to give you the exact blueprints you need for test day.
And here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We're going to start with the culture lens, move into kinship and marriage, hit politics and economy, touch on religion, do some essential essay prep, and finally run through a quick practice quiz. We're progressively zooming out from the concept of culture itself all the way to global interconnectedness.
All right, part 1. Let's look through the culture lens and start decoding some human behavior.
Let's start our fieldwork with chapters 1 and 2, defining the very water our cultural subject swims in. The absolute core concept you need here is holism. On your exam, describe holism using the analogy of a spider web. Imagine plucking one single strand, say the economy. Well, that vibration travels through kinship, politics, and religion. You simply cannot study human family structures without looking at how they feed themselves or how they govern themselves. Everything is connected.
And that actually brilliantly illustrates our next core dynamic: cultural relativism versus ethnocentrism. Think of cultural relativism as wearing different colored glasses to objectively understand a society in its own unique context. Ethnocentrism, on the other hand, is judging them strictly through your own bias prescription. So ethnocentrism is looking at another culture and basically saying, we do it better. Cultural relativism is stepping back and asking, okay, why does this practice actually make sense for them?
Now, to do that properly, you absolutely must know the difference between the emic and etic approaches. The emic approach captures the rich, subjective insider's perspective of a ritual. The etic approach? That is our objective, comparative, scientific analysis from the outside. A really good anthropologist uses both. You start emic to understand their true feelings, and then you shift to etic to compare it globally. Moving right along to part 2, kinship and marriage. This is the family foundation. Zooming out from the individual mind, we move into Chapter 7 to see how our subject forms their very first critical social bonds. You are definitely going to want to memorize this matrix for your exam. It neatly compares how societies organize descent to pass down property and how marriage rules build vital survival alliances. Notice the differences here. The contemporary U.S. relies on monogamy and bilateral descent, meaning we trace lineage through both parents. But look at the newer of Sudan. They practice polygyny, one man with multiple wives, and they follow patrilineal descent through the father's line. Contrast that with the Kashi of India, who practice polyandry, one woman with multiple husbands, and trace matrilineal descent through the mother. So the crucial takeaway here is that family isn't just biology. It is a culturally engineered tool for survival.
All right, on to part 3, politics and economy, how we organize power and resources.
As our subject's family grows into a much larger community, they're going to need systems to organize resources and maintain order. You need to contrast foraging, which is a highly mobile, equal-sharing economy, with agriculture, which relies on tools and surplus, and ultimately creates complex social classes. Foraging is our oldest economic system, right? People moving in small groups, sharing what they hunt and gather. But man, the moment agriculture is introduced, society completely shifts. You suddenly get surpluses, which means you need property rights, and boom, suddenly you have social inequality. So let's see how this builds into political systems. Be ready to outline Elman Service's typology on the test. You need to show how political control scales up from egalitarian, kin-based bands and tribes to highly stratified chiefdoms and finally to law-enforcing states. If you have foragers, you generally have a band. But if you have agriculture and massive populations, well, you're going to need a state with a formal government, armies, and police just to maintain social control.
Part 4, religion and the sacred. Let's talk about understanding the cosmos. Stepping beyond the physical world into Chapter 9, our subject seeks to understand the unknown and solidify their community through the sacred. Look at these Mari dancers for a second. Religion and ritual are not just about belief, they are about creating social unity, emotional solace, and shared identity through enculturation. Emil Durkheim actually called this religious effervescence. It's that incredible bubbling up of collective emotional intensity when a group gathers for worship or a ritual. It literally binds people together.
Make sure you lock in these core definitions. First up is Edward Tyler's concept of animism, which is considered the earliest form of religion rising from dreams and trance states. He theorized that early humans believed a double or a soul actually left the body during sleep, which sparked the whole belief in spiritual beings. Next, contrast that with mana. This is a raw, impersonal force, kind of like luck or, the Force from Star Wars. Finally, keep totemism in mind, which is the worship of real-world entities. And remember the core functions here. Religion isn't just about explaining the cosmos. It's heavily involved in social control and keeping the moral order intact.
Okay, part 5, essay prep. Let's look at cultural change and globalization. Now, let's get you prepared for your long-form essay by looking at Chapter 11. We're exploring how our subject's culture collides with a rapidly globalizing world. You should build your essay using this exact blueprint. Make sure you clearly distinguish assimilation, which is where a minority completely loses its culture as it gets absorbed into the dominant one, from acculturation, which is a mutual blending of traditions when two cultures interact. But to really impress your professor, you absolutely need step 2.
Do not forget to mention the discipline's own history. Explain how anthropology actually started as a tool for colonial administration, but then evolved into a science grounded in human rights and cultural relativism. Early on, anthropologists used evolutionary frameworks to rank societies and essentially justify European imperialism. They were deeply involved in othering these groups. You must contrast that history with modern anthropology, which relies on informed consent, collaboration, and deep ethical reflection.
All right, finally, part 6. Let's do a quick practice quiz to test your fieldwork readiness. It is time to test your grasp of the material with a rapid-fire scenario straight out of the field. Read this scenario carefully and think back to the foundational concepts we discussed at the very beginning of our review. Okay? A researcher judges a local healing ritual as backward compared to Western medicine. Which anthropological error is this? I'll give you a second to think.
And the answer is ethnocentrism. This is the absolute biggest trap an anthropologist or, frankly, an anthropology student on exam day can fall into. Instead of trying to understand the emic perspective, meaning how the locals actually view their own medicine, the researcher applied their own cultural bias.
Well, we have covered a massive amount of ground today, and you are officially prepped. As you head into your exam, I challenge you to look around your own world and recognize that invisible cultural spiderweb that connects us all. How will you use the anthropological lens to decode your own life today? Best of luck on the test, you're going to crush it, and stay curious.